Is perfectionism making you sick? It is time you knew about the really detrimental impacts of trying to pursue a perfect life, a perfect identity, and have everyone else see you as perfect. Welcome to the What's Eating You podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie, and I'm a psychologist, published author, and public speaker here to educate and validate. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to the What's Eating You podcast. I'm your host, clinical psychologist Stephanie Giorgio, and I'm here to uncover this hidden epidemic, perfectionism. In this episode, we're going to talk about how perfectionism is damaging your mental health, how it's on the rise, and we need to address it right now. This question came from Psychology Sunday on Instagram, where I put a box every Sunday and ask you for your questions on psychology. Someone asked about perfectionism and said it is absolutely ruining them. They're depressed, anxious, and exhausted, and they want to know what to do about it. Now, to be honest, I've always known perfectionism is an issue, but I've never really dug into it because I myself am not a perfectionist. I've only really seen the damaging impacts it's had for clients I used to work with, and I know that there is something called clinical perfectionism. So if you're listening to this thinking, I think that's me, stick around. We're going to go through what perfectionism is, the different types of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and how to overcome perfectionism. This is such a useful episode for anyone who imposes high standards on themselves and wants to know how to better improve their lives. Now, if you haven't yet, make sure you click the follow button right now on the podcast and also hit the rating and leave a review. I really appreciate your reviews, and we are almost on 100 reviews, so I cannot wait till we reach our goal together. Now, when you think of perfectionism, you might be just thinking of having high standards, right? You might just think, I'm a perfectionist, I've got high standards. But the thing is, it is so much more than that. The issue with perfectionism is, whilst it might seem applaudable and you're reinforced for being perfect in some way, it's not sustainable or even obtainable. You can be perfect, you can be positively reinforced for this, but sooner or later you are going to crash and burn. And do you know what the most messed up part of this all is? That it's self-imposed. No one is putting high pressure and expectations on you. No one is holding a gun to your head saying you need to eat perfectly, you need to have the perfect weight, you need to have the perfect body, you need to obtain the highest marks at uni, you need to get the perfect job. And perfectionism extends to so many areas of your life. If you're listening to this, tell me, do you have an area of your life where you think you're perfectionistic or have perfectionism? No one's making you be perfect. So we're going to explore where this comes from. I recommend getting a pen and paper because there is a lot to take in. Because when you're the one putting these high pressure, high standard situations on yourself, you're the only one who can change it. Why do you want to change it? Let's first talk about what perfectionism is and why it is so damaging. Research has shown that perfectionism can lead to anxiety, depression, reduced resilience, reduced productivity, and burnout. The definition is that it's a sense of lack or it's a deficit. See, people just think, I have high standards. No. It's deeper than that. It's when you don't feel good enough and your whole existence is proving to others that you matter. You are constantly trying to prove that you are not flawed, and this is fueled with insecurity. So deep down, perfectionists have this sense that they are less than. So your existence is trying to constantly impression manage what people think of you, and this is an exhausting way to live. You hide, you are super sensitive to mistakes and criticism, and you avoid challenging situations, and over time, this actually creates significant mental health problems. You're worried about what other people think and say, and you might actually project this onto other people. So not only are you perfectionistic with yourself, you might project these standards onto others and say, if I've got these standards, you need to be perfect too. Why is it so bad for us? Well, when you are constantly trying to be perfect. You're constantly trying to be a certain way because you're trying to control what other people think of you. It is exhausting. You're not being your true self. And do you know what this does? It makes you disconnected from people. Because what happens is if you make mistakes publicly, you're scared that you're going to be shunned. You're scared that you're going to be excluded. You're scared that you're going to be lonely. Now, I've worked with people with all different walks of perfectionism, and I'll explain a couple to you. So the first one I see a lot in food freedom and with disordered eating, and the program I run is this perfectionistic around how you look and how you should eat in front of other people. Many people get this identity of being the fit one, of being the slender one, of being the super active person, and they feel this pressure to keep this up. I have to look this certain way. I have to keep going to the gym. I have to keep showing up because everyone says how dedicated and strong I am. That's the first kind. The second kind of perfectionism I used to see a lot when I used to work with adolescents at Headspace was OCD. Obsessive compulsive disorder is driven by perfectionism because if you're not perfect, then you get anxiety. And so you're trying to keep up these perfectionistic traits. And the third type of perfectionism, which is really hard to actually pick up on and diagnose, is from OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is a mental health condition that is driven by trying to uphold ethical, moral standards, being justice, holding justice, making sure things are right, being super organized, being ultimately prepared. Now, this is a personality disorder, so it is a bit extreme, but I just want to let you know that there are so many mental health issues that perfectionism presents itself across that I wanted to share. It's called a transdiagnostic risk factor. So what that means is that there's a lot of different mental health conditions that have this overlap. So transdiagnostic means that it applies over a range of diagnoses, and this can include body image issues, body dysmorphia, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, OCD, OCPD. So not only does perfectionism make you vulnerable to mental health issues, it disconnects you with people. And the second big issue is that it makes you very vulnerable to setbacks, failure, and making mistakes. And this is because your self-esteem is tied to being perfect. So you're not going to take challenges. And when you do take challenges, and if you do make a mistake or stuff up, it's over because that's your whole identity. So what that means is you don't even try. Second thing, are you actually a perfectionist? Where do you rank on the perfectionism scale? So whilst perfectionism is not a clinical disorder or diagnosis, there are different severities of it and different spectrums of it. Here are some signs that you might be a perfectionist. When things go wrong, you freak out. If they don't go to plan, you absolutely freak out. Now, this is okay and it's normal for most people, but it's that level of freaking out. So for me, I might take 2 seconds to be like, crud, that didn't work out. But I'm like, what's the worst that can happen? And trust me, this is through years and years of conditioning myself to be this way. But I'm also not a perfectionist. And I'm very grateful that I'm not a perfectionist. But I'm going to explain why I think I'm not a perfectionist and how it works for me. And maybe you can take some inspiration from that. The other sign is that you hear feedback as you are a terrible person. So if someone said to you, hey, how are you going? Haven't seen you in the gym. Is everything all right? You hear that as they think I'm fat because I haven't been in the gym. I'm terrible. I'm letting people down other than the person's just asking you how you are. This one is huge. When you have done something well, how do you feel? So if you've accomplished something quite awesome, right? How do you feel about it? Do you quickly move on from it? Do you take it in? Do you soak it up? Do you tell your family and friends? Or do you put it down to luck? Do you move on and get on to the next thing? Do you think, the better I do, the better I'm expected to do? Do you allow yourself to savor and enjoy the moment? Or do you not give yourself permission for that? You see, people with perfectionism, they often don't celebrate their wins. They often don't sit down and say, wow, I'm really proud of myself. I had a great month. I've done so good. Let's go celebrate. It's really a quick thing. Or, oh, it's a fluke. Oh, the test was easy. They attribute their success to outside forces and think, oh, well, I didn't get 100%. I could have done better. Now, I'm the opposite of this. When something good happens in my life, I go on about it and I'm really proud of it. But I still have that part of me that's like, okay, what's the next step? Let's go. But life is really unenjoyable when you don't celebrate your wins. So last night I went out with friends. It was June 30th, the last day of the month. And I said, let's go in a circle. What are you proud of this month? And one of my friends was saying, I love this. I love this so much. I've never done this before. It is so important to recognize your wins. And this is something that people with perfectionism won't allow themselves to do. They won't savor the moment. And this will hold you in a bind and a grind that makes you dissatisfied. Why does this happen? Where does it come from? Why are some of us perfectionistic and some of us are not? So we know that deep down, perfectionists, they know they're flawed, but they don't want anyone to see this. So what they do is they engage in performative behaviors. Imagine that you are constantly on a stage, you're constantly performing, and you're trying to act in a certain way. That's really, really tiring. That's like you're putting on a show 24/7. It is a relational trait that operates in the social world. So what that means is you think that other people expect perfection of you when they don't. They don't care. But this is what you think. Right? Now, the root, as mentioned, is you think you're not good enough and you secretly don't want people to know this. So your whole life is about bridging the gap of this real version of you that you're scared people are going to discover and this ultimate version of you that you project to the world. But the issue is trying to be perfect because you can't keep it up. Now, it usually comes from a combination of nature and nurture. 30 to 40% of perfectionism is inherited and genetics. If you had perfectionistic parents, if you had parents who were really tough on you, parents who said to you that you've got to be better, you've got to be smarter, you've got to work harder, then it's likely that you are going to struggle with perfectionistic tendencies. The second thing is, you may be born with a tendency, but our environment is what keeps perfectionism going. It depends on the culture, the school you're in, your peer groups. If you have perfectionistic friends or sisters or brothers, then you're more likely to be like that. The other thing is it's getting worse. Perfectionism is on the rise. And what they've found is since the release of the iPhone in 2007, perfectionism is getting worse where they've studied it. Schools are more competitive. Parents are putting more pressure on kids to get into universities. And 2007 to 2008 was really the rise of social media as well. And social media, Instagram is a perfectionistic reel of many people's lives. So this is why we're feeling the pressure to perform and the pressure to be perfectionistic. But I encourage you to reflect on, where did this come from for you? When did your perfectionism start? Why did it start? And what do you get out of it? Honestly, what do you get out of it? Do people comment on how organized you are, on how perfect you are? What do you get out of being perfect? And the second thing I want you to ask yourself is, at what cost does this come to you? Let's talk about the costs of perfectionism, right? We know it causes increased anxiety. We know it causes increased depression. We know it leads to less satisfaction. We know that it leads to mental health issues as well. So for you, what does it lead to? Exhaustion, burnout, less resilience when things go wrong? And is it worth it for you? Right? Now we know what perfectionism is, the signs of perfectionism, where it comes from. I'm going to talk about the 3 different types of perfectionism. The first is self-orientated perfectionism. Now, remember, all of these occur on a spectrum. You might have traits. It's not a diagnosis. And this is the inner drive. This is self-imposed standards. This is orientated towards yourself. You're driving it. The second is socially prescribed perfectionism, which is we think others want us to be perfect, and we're waiting for people to catch us out not being perfect. This is people pleasing, and this is the one that's on the rise, and I think that's highly because of social media and highly because people pleasing and perfectionism is a coping strategy. In schema therapy, we call this the perfectionistic overcompensator. So you know what fight, flight, freeze, fawn is? Their responses. Now, perfectionistic overcompensating, it's a type of fight response. So anytime you're feeling vulnerable, anytime people are coming near your insecurity, or you're worried about people discovering the real you, you activate a perfectionistic overcompensator mode. These are called coping modes. And this is where you make sure your work is perfect, you arrive early, you leave late at work, because what you think is, if I show up flawless, if I do everything perfectly, then no one's going to come near my vulnerability and know the real me. Now, the third type of perfectionism, which I can relate to a little bit, having gone through an eating disorder, is outward orientated perfectionism. Now, this is projecting onto others. So basically, it goes like this. I expect myself to live up to these standards, so it's only fair to hold you up to the same standards as well. Now, I see this a lot in relationships where one person is really into their fitness, really into dieting and shredding down, and they project that onto others. Oh, we shouldn't have this in the house, or we shouldn't have chocolate in the house. They project that their standards onto other people, and this also can be your overbearing boss who's micromanaging you or projecting their standards onto you. So it's really important to be aware of these standards. I definitely think with me, I'm not a perfectionist, but I definitely have projected my standards onto other people when it comes to eating and all that, especially in the past. So I just wanted to highlight the three types of perfectionism. Again, remember, these can occur on a sliding scale and can affect us all differently. This is my favorite thing to listen to. Do non-perfectionists exist? And the answer is yes, I am one of them. So this is how I know that I'm not a perfectionist, right? I take setbacks on the chin. So if I get feedback, if someone gives me criticism, it hurts for a little minute. It's like a little sting, but I reframe that immediately and I say, do you know what? It's not feedback. Sorry, it's not failure. It's feedback. It's not failure. It's feedback. And I really see any criticism or critique in a really positive light. So any negative situation, rather than dwelling and scorning myself and just going in this self-loathing circle, I'm like, okay, they have a point. That's a really good thing I could potentially work on. So for example, people used to say, oh, your videos, you talk too fast. You're giving me anxiety. And instead of me crumbling in a hole, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I do talk really fast and it is anxiety provoking in some ways. So I'll talk slower. The second thing I think makes you not a perfectionist is you're really at ease with situations. And despite what happens, you radiate this serenity. This is me listening to another podcast on perfectionism, and I'm just taking these ideas and I can relate to them. I purposely do things imperfectly because it means I would never get things done. So for example, this podcast, I don't edit every mistake out because that would drain my life. I don't do things perfectly because what's more important to me is getting things done. I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I'm not afraid to upload an imperfect video because to me, not getting it done would be more stressful than doing it imperfectly. And it doesn't bother me. So many people will comment on things like, oh my gosh, your nails aren't done. Or my sister will be like, oh, you made a spelling error. Or someone will be like, this is wrong. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, but meh, whatever. So I don't dwell on things. I don't worry what other people think about me. Everyone does. Everyone worries what other people think about them, but I still do it anyway So I think what makes you not a perfectionist is that you don't dwell too much on things and you just chill to just go with the flow, and you chill when things don't go your way. I mean, it stings, it hurts, but you move on from it. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. It's closely linked with perfectionism. And then that made me realize, okay, I don't have imposter syndrome. And maybe that's because I don't have perfectionism. So perfectionism, again, it comes down to I'm not enough. So I try to project this perfect version of me. And the problem is when you're trying to project this perfectionistic version of you because deep down you don't feel enough, then you're really not being yourself. You're just being this perfectionistic version because you don't feel good enough. So the problem with that is you're always going to feel as an imposter because it's not really you. The person you're acting is not really you. So remember, perfectionism is really about this shame-based fear of not feeling enough. You feel shameful. And perfectionism can look like other things. It can look like conscientiousness, etc. But you got to remember, it comes from a place of shame and fear of not being enough, right? Now we've gone through that, I'm going to talk about how to overcome perfectionism and actually enjoy your life. So the first thing, there's 4 to 5 steps, is you want to develop your mindfulness around your perfectionism. Where does it show up in your life? Where are you perfectionistic? Is it coloring in? Do you have to color in all the lines? Is it how you present yourself to other people? Is it your thoughts? Is it your tendencies? Is it in the gym? Is it how you eat? Where does your perfectionism show up in your life? And start to write this down. Now, this is the hardest part, but you're going to engage in being imperfect. I want you to send an imperfect email. Don't spend 6 hours on an assignment. Spend less time, because the only way to overcome perfectionism is to do things imperfectly, because what this is going to teach you is that you're going to get the same result. So even if you spend 12 grueling hours on something and you get an A, people think, I got an A because I spent 12 grueling hours on it. But if you actually spend less time and get the same result, you're going to realize, oh my gosh, I didn't need to put myself through that awful ordeal to get the result. So I want you to start being imperfect. Post an imperfect video on social media. Do an imperfect assignment. So many perfectionists won't even hand in assignments because it's not perfect. People who are handing it in, they're passing, and the assignment may not even be that good. So I want you to ask yourself, what is the lowest possible standard for me to get this done? I remember listening to a podcast and the lady said, hey guys, in order for me to get this podcast actually out to you, I needed to set the lowest standards for myself, and that's just recording and getting it out there. And ever since then, I've loved it. Set the minimal standard to get things done in your life. Number 2, so now that you are aware of your perfectionistic tendencies and now that you're going to start being imperfect, you got to sit with those feelings, and it's going to feel like SHIT. So you've got to be vulnerable in embracing all your feelings and open yourself up to failing. The more comfortable you can get with discomfort, the better you get out of it. So for example, a lot of people I know get social media hate. I'm friends with quite big influencers and people with followings, and the more hate they get, the thicker skin they get. It doesn't make it any easier to deal with, but they're used to it, right? But the problem is when you're a perfectionist, you won't even try, which means your skin is very thin. You're not developing thick skin because you're not even trying. So you got to put your hand up to do things you might suck at. So if you want to record more videos, if you want to not be seen as perfect in the way you eat, in the way you present yourself, start doing the opposite and just be open to the fact that people might comment or might say, oh, I didn't see you in the gym as often this week. And so, yeah, I'm trying to come less to the gym. So it starts with being brave enough to try. So if you allow yourself to do this, you're going to feel discomfort and you got to sit with this. Don't fight it. Just sit with it and be compassionate and say, you know what? I feel really uncomfortable that I sent an imperfect email, But that's okay. That's part of this process. I'm meant to feel this. I'm meant to feel this psychological, uncomfortable squirm. So don't fight it. Just be present with yourself and be present with this discomfort. Now, you have to practice this on a day-to-day basis, and you've got to be kind to yourself, and you've got to be kind to others who might be in the same situation. The benefit of this is that it's actually going to bring you closer to other people. We feel connected to people who embrace imperfection. And one thing I've observed in one of my close friends who is really big on social media is she's perfect, but she's also imperfect at the same time. Like she'll say, I slept through my alarm, whoops, or I meant to get this many gym sessions and I didn't. That's okay. She really promotes this imperfect perfection. It's really strange because people would think she's perfect, but she's really open about how she's not perfect. And I think that's why people love her. So when we see people be imperfect, we feel closer. We feel they're more relatable. And this is so valuable in terms of our mental health. The next thing is I want you to embrace the power of good enough. Who I am is enough as long as I'm allowed to appear openly. That's a quote from Carl Rogers. The fact you may suck at something shouldn't be the reason you don't do it. It should be the reason you do it. Things that have helped me get through things in my life and just get it done. People think I'm super motivated, but I'm really not. I just do it despite it not being perfect because it means more to me to get it done than to do it well. And this is a double-edged sword because, if I probably did things better, I'd get a different outcome, but that's not important to me. So here are some things that have helped me. Done is better than perfect. Number 2, in my uni degree, everyone said, P's get degrees, as in passes get you a degree. You don't have to get HDs. Might be nice, but P's get degrees. And it's so true. The less you ruminate on doing an assignment well versus doing it is so different. You can't edit a blank piece of paper. And progress over perfection. I love this. Everyone has to start somewhere, and progress is what makes you happy. Perfection is what makes you miserable. And the last thing to do to help you overcome perfectionism is just radically accept yourself the way you are. Let things go, right? The consequences of being imperfect show you that you can handle the worst possible scenario. You are not going to die. And when people see you imperfectly, guess what? They're not going to change the way they think about you. They might actually like you more because you might be more relatable to them. So the minute you start to worry, just think, how did I get here? And how I got here is not going to be the way that's going to get me out. So do your best, but surrender where you need to. Now, it's not easy, okay? Overcoming perfectionism, it's not easy. It's a pervasive issue that extends far beyond having high standards. It's a deeply ingrained mindset that's tied to insecurity and fear of inadequacy. But I'm telling you to be inadequate. I'm telling you to be who you are and accept that these might just be thoughts in your mind. So this episode explored where it comes from, the different forms and the impact it can have on your mental health. And just remember that being imperfect, it's actually going to make you more happy. But it starts by identifying where you're trying to be perfect, 2, being imperfect, and 3, sitting with the discomfort that imperfection brings you. So by practicing mindfulness, embracing vulnerability, and accepting good enough, helps you let go of the need of perfection, and you can combat the harmful effects that perfectionism can have on you, and you can lead such a more fulfilling life. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating and share your thoughts. Take a screenshot and tag me on Instagram. I can't wait to see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I am truly grateful for you being here. If you got something out of today's show, please take a moment to leave a rating or review. To access more resources or support, check out the show notes below. See you next time.